I have never been a huge believer in the supernatural, but I'm not closed-minded either. It's just I have never had an experience of my own. That is, until one night in early December of 2016. I was 16 at the time and was doing what I love best. That is, hunting with my father and grandfather. I have been an avid hunter since my dad brought me my first hunting license when I was just a mere age of 7. Throughout my life I have hunted all kinds of game, from pheasants and turkeys, bears and foxes, to deer and elk. So it's safe to say, I am very familiar with the wildlife all over the United States. This particular encounter took place on my grandparents' property in southern Maine. They own 55 acres of land with a small river that runs through the southwest corner of the property. However, that time of year, that river is nothing but a mud pit. For a little more detail, the topography of the land is very hilly with steep inclines and deep valleys. The plan for the evening hunt was supposed to be a short one and was only supposed to take 2 to 3 hours. My dad and grandpa were supposed to come from opposite sides of the valley, and I would come down the hill, and we would all meet at the halfway point in the valley and walk out together. The valley was very easy to find, and it was an old logging road and was well marked. The idea was to push deer to each other. We had a late start, so there were only 2.5 hours or so of daylight left by the time I started my solo trek down into the valley. Before I started my hunt, I pulled out my phone and looked at the map of the property. I know, I should be able to walk down the hill without navigation, but I have a huge fear that I'll take a wrong turn and get horribly lost. What scares me most is pissing off my grandfather for making him wait for me at the rendezvous point. So to be safe, I looked at the map. The first part of the hunt started off without a hitch. It was making good time while stopping every once in a while trying to look for a deer sign. So far, there was nothing worth mentioning, but I was happy to be in the woods regardless. Things, however, became really bad really quickly. As I mentioned, there wasn't much daylight left to begin with, so we took that into account. What we didn't take into account was that the storm came in like a bat out of hell with no warning. In an instant, the sky became dark as night, and the snow came down to the point where seeing more than 5 feet in front of you was damn near impossible. I had enough and began to haul my butt to the meeting point at the bottom of the hill. Once I finally reached the level ground, a wave of relief finally fell over me. I was cold, wet, and wanted a hot shower. Then my heart sank. I was not at the old logging road. In fact, I had no idea where I was. Crap. Everything I know about making out of situations like this tells me to stay calm. Forget about that, I am everything but calm. I knew I was down the hill, so I had the hope that my grandfather and dad were somewhere close by. Not even thinking about scaring any deer, I yell out, "Dad! Grandpa!" I took a momentary pause to listen for a response. All that I heard was the wind blowing through the valley and the sound of snowfall. Then I heard something I truly cannot explain. I heard, "Dad! Grandpa!" echoed back to me. What the heck? "Over here!" I yelled back, only to have, "Over here!" yelled back to me. This time it was really close. Whatever was echoing me was moving fast. To heck with this. I pulled out my phone to try to call my dad or at least figure out where I am, but of course it was dead. The only thing I was sure of was the fact that I did not want to be in these woods any longer. I figured that if I walk in one direction long enough, I would eventually end up at a house or a road. I must have been walking for close to a half hour with no sign of, well, anything but more woods. The whole way I had an uneasy feeling. It was like something was there, but it wasn't like it was watching me. It felt like it was stalking me. Every time I paused to get my bearings, I could hear the sound of the snow crunching under my footsteps. When I had enough, I called out, "Who's there?" Nothing but the sounds of steps circling me. Then I remember them stopping. I was able to pinpoint where the steps stopped. It was dead ahead of me. I looked out into the woods, and behind a large hemlock I noticed something ducked behind a tree. It was quick, so I couldn't make out any details. But whatever it was tall and skinny, and but was thin enough to hide behind a tree without being seen. By this point, I wasn't sure what my next move would be. I was too afraid to move forward to the hemlock. I had no interest in finding out whatever this creature was. I raised my rifle and pulled back the firing pin. I put a round into the tree, and almost instantly I heard the thing take off at warp speed. Thinking I got rid of this thing, I continued walking in the same direction. I thought if I could just get to a road, my dad and grandpa would be looking for me, so I carried on and so did the storm. After another hour or so, with no other issues, I finally stumbled onto a paved street. Now I had to figure out how to contact my dad, so they could come pick me up. That is when I heard it again. "Dad! Grandpa! Over here!" The thing had still been stalking me. I fired off another round into the air, but it had no effect. The creature just kept yelling back to me, and it was getting closer. Once it sounded like it was almost on top of me, it went dead silent. I looked around and heard a welcome sound. It was my dad's truck coming down the road. Thank God. I piled in and began to tell my dad and grandpa everything. When my dad started to drive off, I looked behind me, and through the red glow of the tail light, I saw a tall figure duck behind another tree. I, to this day, never figured out what was stalking me in those woods. If anyone has any ideas as to what I encountered, I'm all ears. I can't be the only one who grew up in a small town with a few resident creeps. I'm not talking about criminals or stalkers, though. I'm talking about those people who live in the house on the hill, or at the end of the street. The people that everyone knows of, but nobody actually knows. Everyone else in town seems to agree that there's something not quite right about them, and they never have visitors. I'm sure you know the type. The tired old cliche. When I was a little kid, I spent a great deal of my time on my grandparents' farm in the foothills of North Carolina. I would explore all around their property, and most of the neighbors would let me explore their land too. However, there was one man who lived a few miles from the farm who my grandparents warned me I should never go near, and the neighbors all agreed something about him was a little bit off. The exact reasons people cited were varied, ranging from PTSD to an escape from a mental asylum, but nobody could say for sure exactly what his problem was. I always followed my grandparents' advice, and I never knocked on the door of the elegant, two-story farmhouse where the mysterious man lived. But I nevertheless found myself standing in front of that old farmhouse back in November of last year. Now, I'm a machinist by trade, but sometimes I work odd jobs on the side for some extra cash. I often do jobs using heavy machinery, mostly grading driveways or digging drainage ditches, so when I got a call asking about what my rate would be for removing about a dozen large tree stumps, I was excited at the prospect of an extra payday. However, when I arrived at the given address, I was a little bit more surprised to find that it was the oh-so-familiar home of the mystery man from my childhood. I slowly rolled up the long gravel driveway, suddenly trepidatious about meeting a man I had been so advised about avoiding. Finally, though, I reasoned with myself that surely the residence must simply be an old shut-in, and I scolded myself for being irrational and almost avoiding a perfectly good customer based on a childhood gossip. I knocked on the door of the farmhouse, and after a few moments the door swung open to reveal an elderly gentleman of about 80 years old. I introduced myself and he hobbled shakily out of the house to show me the stumps that needed to be removed. I gave him my estimate for the cost and he slowly nodded, saying, "That'll be fine. When can you start? The sooner the better." We shook hands on a date and price, and as I got back in my truck to leave, I thought to myself that seemed far less scary than all the rumors might suggest. Although, as I looked over my shoulder to back down the driveway, a flash of movement from the tree line caught my eye. It was only there for a second, but I could have sworn I saw a person's face staring out from behind one of those trees at the edge of the yard. I had always been told that the man lived alone, but I figured it wasn't really that odd for someone to be visiting, right? Maybe it was an out-of-town grandchild exploring the woods, just like I had done as a kid. Anyway, I returned a few days later, and the stubborn walnut stumps proved no match for my old D7. Once I was done, I knocked on the door and informed the owner I had finished early and I would be billing him for fewer hours of work than anticipated. He smiled dryly and thanked me for my honesty, offering to pay me extra for finishing the job so quickly. I initially assured him that it was really no big deal, but then he made me a very tempting offer. He asked if I would like to come on and hunt on his land since it was the height of deer season at the moment. I was certainly interested, since this entire 250-acre property was ringed with barbed wire fences and no trespassing signs. In fact, everybody I knew avoided the place due to the rumors and the stigma surrounding the owner, and that meant I would probably have a chance at some pretty nice deer if I took him up on the offer. I eagerly accepted and thanked him for the opportunity, and so, as I had a free weekend, I headed out to his land again. Nearly the entire property was covered in dense woods and pine thickets, so this wouldn't be the usual post up in a tree stand and wait sort of hunt. No, this would be a real old school deer stalking. It couldn't have been more than 40 degrees that day, and to make things worse, it was misting rain. It was great weather for hunting, but it certainly made me grateful for my thick clothing and warm socks. I followed a tangle of game trails through the thick woods and I saw plenty of deer tracks. Even a few really large ones, all leading deeper and deeper into the pines and cedars. I should also mention that the woods were incredibly calm and peaceful since the gloom and chill of the rainy November day had practically put the entire forest to sleep. In fact, other than the occasional rustle of a small animal dashing through the damp underbrush, the only noise were my own footsteps and the soft patter of rain. The rest of the day passed in much the same way. But by 5:15 it was starting to get too dark to hunt, so I decided to turn around and start making my way back to my truck. Luckily, the rain mostly stopped, but a thick fog now hung in the damp evening air. I carefully retraced my steps as the woods became darker and darker. However, just when I was about to pull out my flashlight, I noticed that mine were no longer the only footsteps in the twilight thicket. I stood very still, listening to the movement in the brush as it drew closer. The footfalls were too loud to be a deer, and besides, even a herd of deer is careful and methodical as they move, pausing regularly and picking their way around any obstacles. By contrast, these footsteps were reckless and constant, and I could hear twigs and low-hanging limbs cracking. This, I realized, was the sound of a human traipsing through the woods. I quietly crouched and hunkered down behind the base of this large poplar tree, making myself small in its shadow. I was worried that whoever was coming might be a poacher, and I certainly didn't want to catch a bullet due to being mistaken for an animal in the murky darkness. As the footsteps grew closer, I realized that was definitely more than one person out here. And even worse, I couldn't tell exactly what direction they were coming from. I could hear voices too. At least 2, and maybe 3, but they sounded muffled and distorted in the thick mist. I held my breath as I listened closely, and I leaned out from behind the tree just enough to look in the general direction of the noise. There, about 20 yards away, was the soft glow of an old, incandescent flashlight bobbing through the fog, and silhouetted in the light, I could see 3 nightmarish figures. At first, I couldn't even make out any sense of what I was seeing. The 3 silhouettes looked so alien and bizarre, each one an amalgamation of human and animal features. However, on closer inspection, I realized that the mysterious shapes were actually people. Strange people. The one in the front was wearing a deer's skull and antlers atop its head, as well as a hooded cloak made from crudely cut animal skin. It was also carrying what looked like a shovel over its shoulder, and in its other hand it held a flashlight responsible for the glow. The second and third figures stood close together, and they both wore a collection of coyote tails like bandoliers across their bodies, along with coyote skulls adorning their hoods. As I squinted and looked more closely, I could see that they were carrying something between them. It was a large tarp or sack, and judging by how the 2 coyote men handled it, it was heavy. As I watched the surreal column move wordlessly through the undergrowth, there was suddenly a loud rustling in the brush behind me. I snapped around, struggling to bring my rifle to bear, but when I turned to face the noise, I saw it was only a fat opossum. The little thing just stared at me for a few moments before dashing away back through the woods. But I guess the noise of its passing had gotten the attention of the 3 animal men, because when I looked back around, the 3 were turning back towards me and had begun to walk in my direction. I held my breath and made myself as small as possible behind the poplar, and I silently flipped my rifle safety off. The deer man drew closer as my heart beat faster and faster. I didn't know for sure that these quote-unquote people would be hostile, but I also didn't want to pop out and introduce myself at the same time. The footsteps of the deer man were very close now, and if I listened carefully, I could make out the sounds of breathing on the other side of the tree. However, just when I was sure it was about to come around the tree, I heard one of the coyote men call out in the distance. I couldn't quite tell what he said, but I could make out the word, heavy, so I assumed he was complaining about whatever he was carrying. The light suddenly disappeared as it pointed back in the other direction and the footsteps receded into the distance. I must have waited a good 5 or 10 more minutes before getting up from my hiding place, unsure of whether or not the bizarre trio had truly left. But when I poked my head back around the tree, they were indeed gone. I wanted nothing more than to get the heck out of there ASAP, but I couldn't help going on and having a quick look at where they had passed. It didn't take me long to locate their footprints. Much to my relief, all 3 sets I found were normal shoe prints, no giant hooves or paws. However, as I shone my flashlight on the ground and investigated the footprints, something else caught my eye. I shined my flashlight further down the trail and sure enough, there were more drops and splotches. Further still, there was a larger puddle, where the coyote man had stopped as the deer man had backtracked. A feeling of nausea brewed in my stomach as I realized the implications of this, and I quickly doused my flashlight to avoid broadcasting my presence. What I saw, right in the middle of the trail, was a glistening splotch of red-brown liquid that couldn't be anything but blood. Now filled with rising panic, I got moving back towards the trailhead as quickly and quietly as possible. The rain had started again, and in the foggy darkness I could barely see a few feet in front of me, but I still only pulled my flashlight out when I absolutely had to, in case those people were still prowling around. Finally, I stumbled out of the woods at about 7:45 and I hastily jumped in my truck and pulled onto the road. I was pretty focused on getting out of there, but as I drove past the farmhouse I did notice that no lights were on. There were no other cars in the driveway either, so whoever I had seen in the woods hadn't come in by that route. Once I was safely home, I called the sheriff's office and anonymously reported that I had seen some suspicious men in those woods. I didn't mention the animal skin cloaks or the various pelts and skulls. I don't know if there was ever an investigation, but nothing ever showed up about it in my local paper. As far as I know, no bodies were ever found and no arrests were ever made, but I can tell you for certain that there are places in those woods where something could hide and never be found. For the rest of the season, I didn't go back there, and I'm not sure the old man's offer was good more than one season. Even if I got a chance, I don't think I would ever go back out there alone. However, at least now I think I understand all of those warnings from my childhood. I don't think all the neighbors were really all that concerned about the old shut-in. I think they knew about those people using his land for God knows what, and they wanted to keep me and all the other kids in the area away from whatever was wandering out there. After all, who knows what somebody that's disturbed in the head would do to a witness in the woods. This happened a few years ago. I was 17 years old. I had my muzzle loader and my grandfather's black powder revolver. Growing up in Ohio, in the Appalachian foothills, I was rather used to the terrain, and the big whitetail here are in those rough-to-get places. I had my day pack and a flare gun, in the low chance that I got hurt or lost. But I left my house probably around 5-ish in the morning. It was the beginning of December, and a light dusting of snow covered the fields and forest floors. I make it about 2 hours into my hike when I find a blood trail. This puts me off because this part of the woods is really hard to get to, and the closest house is mine. Curiosity got the best of me though, so I followed it thinking one of the few bears in the area was out and about, or a pack of coyotes got a fawn. What I did find on that blood trail was an old man, early to mid-70s, who was just staring at me, if not through me. Both of my parents are first responders, so I know enough about medical attention to help a little. But as soon as I got close to him, I noticed that he wasn't the one bleeding. I could see the blood-soaked shirt he had on, and his hands holding it was seeping with blood through his fingers. But there was no pool of blood. I called out to him a few times, slowly walking towards him, but I got no response. When I finally got to where he was, he looked up at me, slouched over. Passing away, I got my flare and shot into the air, and covered the man to the best of my abilities with what little I had to show respect to his death. After an hour or so, the search and rescue helicopter landed in a field close to where I was, and my dad ran over to me, and I explained everything to him. I took them to where I left the old man's body, only for it not to be there. The blanket and branches I put over him were still there, and the blood trail was even there. However, his body wasn't. To this day, my family and most search and rescue workers we have in our area won't go into that valley. I'm not sure why, but maybe that has something to do with it. So a very good friend of mine was deer hunting in rural Pennsylvania late into the evening. It was pretty dark and he was waiting for his dad to pack up and pick him up on the ATV. He was on the ground in a blind when he saw two large yellow eyes looking at him from only a few yards ahead. They stared, unmoving at him for around 20 minutes or so, and whenever he tried to shine a flashlight at them, and the brush, it seemed to conceal whatever was connected to the eyes. He couldn't see fur or a body at all. They appeared to be maybe 3 feet off the ground, so he eventually gives up and assumes it's a bobcat or something. As soon as the ATV arrives and gets close, however, the eyes stand up to a height of roughly 7 feet or so, and whatever it was makes a quick sharp turn and sprints away. It doesn't amble or gallop as a bear might, but it sprints away like someone running on a track. He believes it was a Bigfoot. I don't believe a flesh and blood Bigfoot could exist in Pennsylvania, but what do I know? What do any of you guys think? Hunting. It seems like fun to some people. I used to feel that way myself. It was never for food, but just sport. I know this sounds cliched, but I had an experience where the hunter became the hunted. In 2009, I decided to do what I often do. That meant taking a break and going somewhere to relax. When I heard that my friends had planned a hunting expedition, I immediately got on board. Since there were 2 of my friends going on that same trip, I figured it would be fun. We ended up going with a veteran hunter named Buck Adams, and yes, that was his real name. He told us stories about previous hunting trips where he bagged whatever he was after. Deer, bear, ruffed grouse, pheasant. He had gotten them all. He told us we were going to a secret hunting spot in western Pennsylvania, to a place where we would find some real trophies. He once got a 17-point buck there. Having a chance to grab something of that magnitude made me even more eager. When we arrived at that spot, we were split into groups of 4, since there was 13 of us. Buck had his own tent. The other 4 were shared by 3 people each. The first night we were there, he said, "Go ahead and explore before you turn in. Just watch out for the werewolf." Since I didn't know how to react, I laughed nervously. A guy with us named Mark told us that a creature called the squonk was more believable than that. Buck's face was stone cold. "I'm not kidding," he said with venom in his voice. When I asked Mark if he was really that confident that there were no werewolves, he gave me an exact reply I was expecting. He just wants to scare us, new kids, old stories, that's the way it works. I was about to reply when we all heard a snap sound. Not knowing what it was, and not wanting to know, we all dove inside a tent. I was with Mark, Christopher, and one of my friends, Grant. Christopher whispered, "That's 4 people. One of you needs to find a different tent." I was about to punch him when I heard a weird guttural growl. The four of us did rock, paper, scissors to see who would go look. Grant was the first one to lose, so he peeked outside. He brought his head back inside within 1 second. His eyes were wide and he seemed to be shocked. "What's wrong?" I asked. He pointed outside. I looked and saw a terrifying sight. There was a monster there. About 8 feet tall, silver hair or fur, glowing yellow eyes, and a muscular build. I was about to yell when Mark grabbed me from behind, dragged me inside the tent, and quietly zipped the flap. "Okay," he whispered. Buck wasn't trying to scare us. He was serious. We all huddled together and heard the creature stomping towards our tent. I let out a sigh of fear. Chris dug his fingers into my arm. Grant started saying Hail Marys, and Mark was letting out squeaks of fear. After 10 minutes, we all heard a rifle shot. The thing howled like a wolf and ran on 2 legs back into the woods. Buck unzipped our flap and asked if we were okay. We confirmed that we were, but Buck still suggested we go to a different area of the state. So we did that very next morning. Was what we saw a werewolf? I can't be positive. But it wasn't like a wolf I've ever seen. For one thing, they can't stand on 2 legs, and they definitely aren't 8 feet tall. And they don't growl or howl in the way that thing did. I decided just to stop camping altogether after that. Think about it. If there was a werewolf out there, what else could be lurking in the woods? Hello. My name is Emma, and I am 20 years old. But this happened when I was around 17, I believe. I lived in New Jersey, Brown's Mills, so there were a lot of woods around. It was perfect to go camping because I love nature, and it's right next to my house. So, one night at around 10:30 p.m., I gathered my friends, Giselle, Aiden, Eli, and Lewis. We went to the woods. We only wanted to look around because this was the New Year's, so I wanted to shoot some fireworks. But we decided to stay there for a while, so we all sat on the ground and I lit a fire, so we could have s'mores. Then, Eli got up to look around. We weren't going to stay there all night until Eli found a cabin. It was a brown and greenish color. It was rusty, and it had a few stains on the windows. To give an idea of what the area looks like, there was a trail next to my house leading into a small patch of trees, and if you went past the trees you would find a small field with a cabin. So we went in. The inside was very dark, and it smelled weird like cigarette smoke. Well, that's the best way I can describe it. A huge living room with a basement. Good thing we brought sleeping bags because if not, we would have had to sleep on the floor, and it was pretty dirty and dusty, and it smelled. I brought snacks for when I got hungry. At around maybe 12:30 a.m., Aiden, Lewis, and Eli were passed out. That meant there was only me and Giselle still awake, and I was bored. Around that time, we started hearing weird noises. Not like growling or anything, but like creepy music. So I looked out the window and I didn't see anything besides our patio, a street lamp, trees, and a white small figure. We decided to ignore it until we started hearing music again. I got annoyed, looked out, and on the tree, there was what looked like a white, deformed bear. I was immediately shaking. I felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. Giselle asked, "Are you okay?" I said yes, but she could tell I wasn't telling the truth. So I said I thought I saw a bear, but I'm sure it was just my imagination. Then it was silent. Her face was as pale as mine, as though she saw it herself. I asked her, "Did you ever see it before?" She didn't say anything for a few seconds. And then she said, Yes, when I was a little kid, I used to see it all the time in the woods at night when I would play outside. I thought he was my friend, and he would walk and try to talk to me all the time." A loud screech interrupted our conversation. I looked outside, at the bear outside of our cabin. We were very silent until my phone started ringing. Of course, the bear thing turned its head to see me and my friend looking out of the crack from the window. We pulled our heads in and called the cops. The bear was very tall, It was looking through the window, so we got one of our blankets immediately covered it. There's no door, so it could have easily got in. We were scared, so after that we woke up our friends and we told them to go to the basement. They didn't say anything, probably because of the look on our faces. After they went to the basement, we soon followed. Me and my friend stayed on the rotten stairs. I heard it come inside and I peeked my head out to see, and it wasn't an ordinary bear. It was tall, white, and deformed. It had red spots everywhere as well as glowing eyes. We didn't run down the stairs because it would make too much noise. Instead, we quietly tiptoed down the stairs. My friend said their ears were ringing. I told them to be quiet. I checked my phone and it was around 3 a.m., so we decided to try to go to bed, but I wound up staying awake just to make sure it didn't come down here with us. Later, at around 6 a.m., the sun was coming up. I checked upstairs and found some of our things were not there, and some of them were scattered around the room. The bear was missing. I'm so glad I survived that. I'm never going camping again, though. Thank you for sharing my story. My family and I go camping every year in Money Creek, past Index in Washington. This happened 2 years ago. It's still something that bothers me deeply, as I was only 16 at the time. Here's some background though. It was windy and cold. I believe fall was right around the corner because we were late for camping. I only remember this because the air was crisp. I woke up at around 3 in the morning. I looked at my phone, and after I adjusted to being blinded, I saw it was only a few minutes past. The family was asleep, so I thought it was perfect time to smoke a cigarette. We were up in a multi-family site, so being across from the bathrooms gave me a good excuse to leave. I grabbed my last smoke, and took off after bundling up, hooking a right and following the road to the other side of the grounds. As I started smoking, I started to feel sick. Dreadful even. Coming up on the other side of the bathrooms, I stopped and looked around. As I felt something was wrong, I could just feel it in the air. I peered over my shoulder, looking deep into the pitch black greenbelt. There was a silhouette of a man. I think. It was darker than the blackness around it, and I froze. I looked about an inch up, where a face should have been. All I saw were 2 white dots, and they were staring into me. I went to step back, but heard a whisper behind me. It was so close it seemed like it was everywhere, but I had a feeling I needed to run. So, that's exactly what I did. I turned heel so fast I almost tripped and dropped my cigarette. The thing was only half done. I was sprinting so hard I was choking on the cold air and got tunnel vision. What seemed like an eternity later, which couldn't have been more than 5 minutes, I was back at the campsite. I practically dived into my tent and curled up in a ball in my bag. I didn't even tell my mom about it, until about a month ago, that is. There's a man in the woods, and I'm worried he's after me. So it's the summer of 2013. I'm 21, and I just finished my junior year in college. The second week of August, a group of my friends and I go on an 8-day camping trip. It's 7 of us in total, 4 guys and 3 girls. We're camping in a semi-remote campground in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It was a large campground, but very few other campers were there. There were a few filled sites near the front of the campground, but we purposefully requested a campground in the back corner. We were completely by ourselves. During the trip, we planned a whitewater rafting trip for one of the days. We were hiking Mount Washington towards the end of the trip and thought maybe we'd do another 1 to 2 other small hikes, with 1 to 2 days of just chilling by the lake at the campground. We also planned on doing plenty of drinking during the evenings. The first couple of days of the trip are fantastic. Whitewater rafting was a blast. Everything's going great. So it's the evening of our third day. We have a roaring fire going. We're all just hanging out at the campsite, drinking, and just messing around. It's around 9:30 when a disheveled looking man walks past our site. His clothes are kinda torn or worn out, messy and tangled hair, etc. He looks to be maybe in his mid-40s. This isn't weird though. We all just think it's another camper doing a late evening stroll around the campground. About an hour and a half later, we see this same man walk past our site in the same direction. This time he's walking slower, almost with a bit of a limp. We're all pretty drunk at this point. I think one of us might have yelled something out to him, but he just kind of ignores us and keeps on walking. Mildly strange, but still is probably just someone who wanted to take a long walk. We wrapped up the night at around 1:30 or 2, I believe. The fire is dying down and we head back to our tents. I usually love sleeping while camping. I usually find it extremely peaceful, but for some reason, I was having trouble sleeping this night. I get up to go take a pee in the woods. When I do, I see a faint light maybe about 50 to 75 yards ahead of me in the woods, if I remember correctly. It looks like a dim flashlight or something similar. I decided, for whatever reason, I want to go investigate. I go back to the tent. One of my other buddies is still awake, so I tell him about it. We get up to investigate. When we do, the light is no longer on. Feeling just a little bit unnerved, I shine my flashlight around the woods a bit, but don't see anything, so I decide maybe my eyes were just playing tricks on me before I go and head back to bed. Sometime later that night, I wake up to a terrifying scream. It was Sarah, one of the girls we were camping with. I jumped out of my tent as quickly as possible and nearly run into her as she's running back into our site. She's still screaming. She screams that there is a man standing in the middle of the woods. Now, our whole party is awake and freaking the heck out. I try to calm Sarah down enough to get her to explain what actually happened. She says she went to go pee in the woods and saw the man from earlier just standing about 15 feet away from her, not moving, being like a statue. We all start freaking out, yelling and screaming and making a giant commotion. I'm internally freaking out and trying to calm down though. I'm just trying to be the voice of reason. If I can get everyone to calm down enough, we can maybe do something. We obviously decide to get the heck out of there. We frantically take down our tents, basically just ripping the poles down and throwing everything into the back of our cars. Then we sped out of there. It's around 4 a.m. We're in 2 separate cars and decide just to drive away from the campsite and try to clear our heads. Eventually, at around 5:30, we find a small diner that's open and decide to head in for some breakfast. We all have different theories about what the heck just happened. Some of us think we just ran into a homeless guy who was camping out in the woods and was surprised by us. Some of the girls think maybe he was purposely stalking us. Either way, obviously none of us are comfortable staying at that campground again. I head back to the front desk of the campground with 2 of the other guys. We explain what happened and the guys at the front desk actually seemed to believe us, but said there were definitely no other campers currently that fit the description of that guy. They were insanely nice about it though, and actually refunded most of the remainder of our stay, which astonished me. As a group, we decided to say F it and we weren't letting one freaky guy ruin our trip. We found another campground, and it ended up being fine. For the most part. At least, we thought it was. Fast forward 2 days. We're hiking Mount Washington. We get up really early and get to the mountain at around 7:30 a.m. to start hiking up. We're a little over halfway up the mountain when we see the very same guy hiking down. Though this time he looks much better. His hair isn't crazy, his hiking clothes are relatively clean. We were all just frozen. A few of us let out a surprised scream. He just strolls past us with a massive grin. Luckily, there are enough hikers nearby that nothing could really happen. We decide to continue hiking up anyways since he is headed in the opposite direction and hope we never encounter him again. We did finish the hike and luckily we didn't see him again. After that, we did decide to cut a trip a little short because, honestly looking back on it, we've all come to the conclusion that we were likely being stalked in some way. If it was just some homeless guy in the woods near the campground, what the heck was he doing hiking down Mount Washington a couple of days later? It was a pretty unnerving and bizarre experience for sure. I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts or comments down below. First of all, let's preface by saying this was in the early 90s, and as we all know, it was a very different world those days, and I was a pretty naive kid. Also, I had kind of a messed up childhood, so this was not the worst thing to happen by far, and therefore I pretty much brushed it off. When I was maybe 11 or 12 years old, I would visit the Boy Scouts Club a lot, which was pretty big back then. And my parents thought that sending me to boys' club camp for the summer only made sense. The camp was not an overnight type deal, but featured all of the normal things you'd expect, like lakes, arts, and stuff like that. I did the normal camp stuff like found a girlfriend and getting into a whole lot of trouble. The camp was run by counselors, which I can only assume were in their 20s to 30s. When you're 12, everyone seems old. And as you would expect, they would come up with very interesting punishments for kids, like being forced to carry a huge wooden totem pole in circles in a hot field for some time. I never actually had this punishment, but I remember one of the other kids getting it. Or just straight up punching you in your chest and knocking the wind out of you, which I did experience. One of the counselors that I had this experience with was named TJ, and he was a very large, well-built guy in his 20s. One day I did something wrong and got sent to the lunch area for essential detention. The area was actually a large concrete floor with a wooden roof attached to a cabin that contained the kitchen. It was basically a school lunch setup where you would come and choose chocolate milk or orange juice and get served a crappy turkey sandwich, a pack of mayo, and one of those amazing brownies. When I get there, I notice there are about 4 or 5 kids already sitting at benches, and TJ is in front of everyone by the lunch area, pacing and saying something. I sit down and don't really remember what happened until things started to get weird. TJ pulled out a knife and got an apple. He started skinning and stabbing it, and saying stuff like, "This is what I'll do to you if you get in trouble again," and other things of that nature. At this time, I honestly did not feel scared in any way, due to my tendency to completely shut down when stuff got bad, but I did remember feeling very creeped out, and that he was trying very hard to be threatening. The younger kids especially, a little girl who was maybe 8 or so, was freaking out crying. The next thing I remember is him telling her to follow him into the kitchen. I then heard lots of screaming and crying coming from the back of the kitchen. After a while he came back with her, and her face was streamed with tears. I remember it vividly. He then looked at me and another boy, and told us to follow him, and he escorted us to a huge walk-in refrigerator and brought us inside and said, "I want you to both start screaming and acting like I'm killing you in here. If you don't make the other kids scared, I'll kill you for real." We did as he asked, and when he closed the door, we started screaming and wailing. At this point, I honestly thought it was some kind of joke or something because I rationalized that the little girl was told the same thing. Anyways, after maybe 5 or 10 minutes, he let us out and told us to go back to our benches. Again, I don't remember anything after this, just kind of feeling blank. I remember when I got home that night from camp telling my mom about it, and I remember she called somebody and I think that guy got fired. I don't remember ever seeing him again, and my parents never sent me back. I never really thought about it much growing up, but as the years have gone by, I look back on things that I've shrugged off as normal, and I see they were anything but that. If you spend enough nights camping, weird things will happen. A couple of years ago, 2 buddies and I did a month-long camping trip across the United States. We would camp in the U.S. Forest Service or Bureau of Land Management areas, and we were driving my pickup truck so we could get back in some fairly deep wilderness on forest roads. After about 15 nights on the road, we ended up in some BLM land near Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park in Colorado. It was our last night in Colorado, and we were exhausted from doing a 14-mile hike earlier that morning. We found the coordinates of a campsite online and arrived at the edge of the pavement at about 6 p.m. Ahead of us was a dusty 2-track lane that snaked through scraggy trees and brush. It made its way to a top of a hill and had views of snow-capped peaks. We hadn't passed a car in a long time. Our truck makes it to the site easily, but none of us get out yet. We sit around inside and look. There's a fire pit, lots of trees, but also an abandoned couch and some other signs of human waste. Not great vibes. It's getting late and we aren't keen on the idea of driving more. We hop out and start walking around, cautiously approaching some garbage bags wrapped in duct tape. This seems like a place where you would find a body, I say to my friends, and they agree. We notice a trail that seems to go in a circle around the top of the hill. We decide to go check that out before we commit to staying. We find some more trash and human waste, but nothing that makes us feel like we should leave. We decide to cowboy camp, sleep on a tarp beneath the stars, and have a nice fire going. We finish off a case of beer, but even with the inebriation, we still feel uneasy. Every couple of minutes, one of us will shine a light into the woods, thinking that we heard something. Even though this is our 20th consecutive night sleeping outside, it doesn't feel right. But it's late, so we start getting ready for bed. We were all carrying bear spray and headlamps. I step into the woods to go pee and walk about 15 feet without turning on my light. I'm standing there peeing. I decide to turn on my light, since the fire messed up my night vision. When I see what the beam of light illuminates, my knees nearly buckle. My jaw is dropped. I stand in silence for 10 seconds before calling out to my friends. Guys, did you see this? In the center of my beam is a bunch of bleached bones wrapped in barbed wire. Hanging from a branch directly above the trail we had walked in, we would have certainly noticed them in the daylight. They must have been hung once it got dark. While we sat only 25 feet away, the consensus among us was screw that, so we snapped a couple of photos of it before throwing our stuff in the car and getting the hell out of there. We drove a little way up the road to a national park campground. I never felt so happy to pay $25 and have neighbors nearby. Whoever put those up during that night, honestly, let's never meet. My hypothesis is that a rancher with a grazing lease put the bones up to scare off the scum that leaves all their trash at the campsites. They're probably cow bones, but they still scared the hell out of me though. As I'm writing this, I'm still not sure what I truly saw, but I believe it was a skinwalker or something like that. For clarification, I live in North Australia. I hope this helps. I was invited to go on a short camping trip with a friend of mine who I'll call Alan. I met up with him at his house early around 9 a.m., and we talked and watched some TV for a few hours before heading out. The place we were heading to was a deep forest high up in the mountains. I didn't know the area well since I had just moved there, so I was not sure what the place was called. The trip there was quite pleasant, as I and Alan talked and enjoyed each other's company. It was nice to catch up with a friend. Once we arrived, we parked the car and started unpacking our equipment. We started setting up our tent and getting ready to start a fire to cook our food. At around 11 p.m., Alan said he was probably going to head to bed as he got up early that morning and was getting tired. I wanted to stay up a little bit longer and just take in the fresh air and view of the forest. After about 10 minutes, I had to go to the bathroom, so I decided to go out into the woods and do my business. I didn't wander too far, but far enough that I wouldn't attract any animals or lose sight of the camp. Once I was done, I started to head back to the camp, and then I saw it. It was a very skinny-looking dog-like creature, standing in the middle of the campsite. The thing was unnaturally skinny, and its limbs seemed contorted like it had gotten hit by a car. However, the creature walked as if it was natural. It walked on 4 limbs and was very graceful with its movements. It was extremely slow and lanky. I didn't know what to do other than stand there at the tree line and watch it. The creature then started to head towards Alan's tent. I was feeling uneasy and not sure if the creature was dangerous or not. The thing sniffed at the entrance of Alan's tent and started to scratch softly as it wanted to get in. Then, with one swift motion, the creature stood up on two legs. It must have been at least 8 feet tall. Then it just ran into the opposite direction of where I was standing into the woods. I waited for another 5 minutes before deciding to come out of hiding and go back to my tent. As I got in and tucked myself into my sleeping bag, I heard a loud screech that sounded like a combination of a man and a pig. It sent chills down my spine. I barely got any sleep that night. In the morning, Alan could tell that I was bothered by something and asked me, "Hey, are you okay?" I asked him if he heard anything at night near his tent, and he told me that he had slept through the whole night pretty soundly. He, of course, was curious now and started to ask me if something was outside of our tent. I knew he wouldn't believe me, so I just said there was a stray dog snooping around the camp. I still don't know what I saw, but I know for sure it wasn't some stray dog. If someone could please tell me what I saw or at least give me an idea of what it was, I would really appreciate it. And thank you, Swamp, for sharing my story. I was probably 19 at the time, and this was about 20 years ago. I was in the woods of Northern California in the Sierras. It was a small town called White Pines where my grandparents' house is, and surrounding the neighborhood is a bunch of woods. I was driving my Dodge Ram Charger up past a lake that used to be used for logging, and then it was turned into the lake. The road goes past the lake into a baseball field into thicker woods. I was in search of a party because many teenagers would go out into the woods and drink as well as party. You could pretty much crash any party because nobody really cared about if somebody who wasn't invited showed up because we all pretty much knew each other. So I was driving up on the main logging road and decided to turn up on a smaller road to see if I saw fire lights or anything. I started driving slowly and decided to stop to check if I heard anything. I was sitting on my lights, just chilling and waiting for anything as far as noise or a sight of a party. All of a sudden a creature came across the small roads out of the woods. I didn't see clothes, but what appeared to be hair, and it had to be at least 6 to maybe 8 feet or more. I saw the lower body, but I couldn't see the face. It appeared to be almost white, but it may have just been the headlights. It seemed to move slowly across and then disappeared. I was frightened and not sure if it was a Bigfoot or what. I took off down the road and was going to hang out and camp because I hadn't camped in a while, and figured if I couldn't find the party, at least I'd camp. So I set up a tent and was off the road a bit, and was just relaxing when I began to hear what sounded somewhat like howling. Like somewhat of a coyote, but then kind of like a wolf. It freaked me out somewhat because it wasn't a regular howling, because I know coyote howls, and these were definitely not them. The sound started to get closer and closer. It was almost so loud that the trees were almost booming. I felt every emotion, from being very scared to creeped out to pissed off. I was just so creeped out I threw everything in my truck and drove off. I did end up finding a party later and got drunk and ended up in my truck passed out. Thanks for sharing, Swamp. I have some other shadow people stories and ghost or demon stories that I might share in the future.